When Czechoslovakia's president in exile, Edvard Beneš, spoke in the English industrial city of Stoke-on-Trent on the 6th of September 1942, it was a turning point in the propaganda war with Germany. This was 3 months after the Nazis had destroyed the village of Lidice near Prague. Many of the men who were murdered were miners or steel workers, and in Britain, the massacre led to a wave of solidarity with the victims, most markedly among miners. The Lidice Shall Live movement that was born in Stoke-on-Trent became the focus of this solidarity, initiated by Barnett Stross, a local doctor and city councillor. David Vaughan reports on a moving story that has been all but forgotten, but has now been commemorated in film.
Chris Gibbs and Michael MacDonald are young filmmakers from Stoke-on-Trent, on the northwestern edge of the English Midlands. They've just completed a moving documentary about the link between Lidice and their hometown. Not only does the film tell the story of the Lidice massacre itself, but also a remarkable tale of empathy and determination, and of one man in particular. Barnett Stross had been born into a Polish Jewish family in 1899, but grew up in Britain. As a doctor, he lived and worked in Stoke-on-Trent, building up close links with the miners and other industrial workers of North Staffordshire. As soon as he heard of the Lidice massacre, he was determined that the village should rise again, and he launched a massive campaign that captured the imagination of people throughout the free world. His role in renewing Lidice after the war cannot be underestimated. It has even been suggested that without him the village would not have been rebuilt at all. Barnett Stross may have been largely forgotten in his home city, but he is still remembered with affection in Lidice itself. Chris and Michael were in Lidice last week to launch the film, called A Light Across the Sea, and I took the opportunity to talk to them.
We first found out about Lidice about 3 years ago. We read an article in our local newspaper in North Staffordshire, which is where we're based, about two people that had been out here and were trying to sort of get involved in arts projects involving Lidice around the city of Stoke-on-Trent. And first of all, it started to open our eyes and think this is something we knew nothing about, which is quite frankly shameful, we think almost, that there's this incredible connection between the two places that we, as documentary makers and people that are interested in social history, didn't have any knowledge of. And then obviously, once we got over that obstacle, we then decided to research it very thoroughly.
And so how did you go about researching it? I mean, did you go look into the archives in Stoke-on-Trent and then come over here and talk to people here in Lidice? Mike?
How we make our films, we've always preferred to get a people's history, to get it from the horse's mouth, as it were, and we always prefer to speak to people. So we came out to Lidice for the first time on the 70th anniversary of the massacre.
So that was in June 2012?
Yeah, in June 2012, and we met a number of people. But of course, back in Stoke-on-Trent, again, we were looking for people with a first-hand experience, so whether that was someone who was at the Lidice Shall Live launch back in September 1942, or it was somebody who knew Barnett Stross themselves, or a miner. We like to speak to people to find out our histories.
Because I found that actually one of the most moving moments in the film was back in 1942 in the Victoria Hall in Stoke-on-Trent, when the Lidice Shall Live movement was established and when President Beneš, the Czechoslovak president in exile, spoke.
But in our own records and in the records of humanity, the name of Lidice will loom large. Lidice will live forever.
You actually had people who'd been there in that room among the, I think you say in the film, there were 3,000 people packed into the hall who had actually experienced that moment. That must have been a wonderful moment, actually talking to them and hear them bringing to life that memory.
Certainly Charles Strasser, who we interviewed in the film, actually lives in Canada and was in Stoke-on-Trent on a rare visit, and we managed to find him and speak to him.
Well, I was present in 1942 when the Lidice Shall Live movement started in the city of Stoke-on-Trent, in the Victoria Hall. It was mesmerizing is probably a good word to use.
It was absolutely bursting at the seams here. There were hundreds of people outside, and I felt very privileged and very honoured to be part of this movement. The people in Stoke-on-Trent, the miners of Stoke-on-Trent, responded marvellously, to the memory of the miners of Lidice. The whole idea of the Nazis was that Lidice shall not live. It was obliterated from maps.
When the news came out, what had happened there, we were obviously extremely concerned. And since Barnett Stross was the councillor at that time, and particularly the doctor for the Czech community, he agreed that something should be done about that to commemorate this terrible deed. And hence, to show support, they overwhelmingly agreed to start a fund to collect money to rebuild the village of Lidice after the war.
And so tell us about the link between Stoke-on-Trent and Lidice. Chris?
Yes, well, Sir Barnett Stross, who was a medical doctor by profession, he moved into the city. He had specialist knowledge in pneumoconiosis and silicosis, the industrial diseases that were prevalent in the mining industry. And he wanted to be able to help the people that were suffering from that. People didn't have money to be able to pay for their health care. And this was between the wars, wasn't it? Absolutely. This is pre-National Health Service as well. So this is very difficult times. And he, on learning about what had happened in Lidice, immediately had a strong connection. Both Lidice and Stoke-on-Trent are mining towns, and he was in a brilliant position to be able to put into place what we now know as the Lidice Shall Live movement.
He realised the importance of this solidarity.
Barnett Stross had the real respect of the mining community because he'd helped them to get recognition for the lung disease that they were suffering from. And I think that the miners, we're talking about solidarity, I would perhaps describe myself as English. Someone may describe themselves as Czech, whereas a miner describes himself as a miner. And that's where that kind of bond came from, really, that life-threatening work that they took part on day by day, wanting to help their fellow miner, regardless of where they were.
Today we pledge ourselves to rebuild Lidice, and we renew that faith and determination to see this struggle through to the bitter end.
And it's one of the astonishing things that we hear in the film, that they managed to raise the equivalent of £1 million among British miners, mostly from Staffordshire, from the Staffordshire coalfield, who themselves would have had precious little money in the middle of the war.
It's hard to compute, I think, now. But it was unanimous, the decision that the miners would contribute towards the cause. And you can't get a better example of the solidarity that we've just been discussing. I mean, there was no question of anyone not wanting to commit to it. And the result is something which is absolutely incredible.
And after the war, Barnett Stross was elected as an MP, a Labour MP, and he came to Czechoslovakia, didn't he, several times, and he was instrumental in the attempt to have Lidice rebuilt and also to have the tragedy of Lidice remembered internationally.
Although I am chairman of the British Lidice Shall Live movement, I hope that my words will represent not only our own feelings, but those of all the comrades who have travelled here from so many countries.
He came over with a delegation of miners from Stoke-on-Trent who, people didn't travel abroad then unless you were fighting in a war. So it must have been a real eye-opener to see what had happened, to come to somewhere that had been totally decimated by the Nazis. And I think that had such an effect on them that it wasn't a matter. They raised the money to help rebuild Lidice. He then went on to be instrumental in the Rose Garden. He then went on to be instrumental in the gallery. It obviously struck a chord with him.
Víte, jak po té hrozné zkušenosti tříletí, co jsme měli, jak se
You know, after all the dreadful things we'd lived through in the 3 years following the massacre, after the inhuman things that the Germans had done to us, someone like Barnett Stross was an inspiration, a reassurance that not all people are the same. We shall not forget what he did for us.
Co se slaví, tak vždycky to jeho jméno je vzpomenutý.
This village and this garden sets out the pattern upon which our civilization can securely rest. For hope and love and peace are enduring pillars which can prop up the high heavens themselves.
And today he's rather nicely remembered, isn't he, in that the road that links the Lidice Memorial with the main road is actually called Barnet Stross Avenue.
Yeah, I think he was a man who's not been recognised a great deal considering what he's done.
Well, that's what I'd like to ask you, because it seems almost unbelievable that you're saying you're from Stoke-on-Trent and that you didn't know even about him or about the connection with Lidice, which strikes me as amazing.
But we were in a huge majority of other people as well who were completely unfamiliar with the subject, and I think...
Why was it forgotten, do you think?
I believe, as we've come to learn through the film and as we've come to learn from speaking to many people here in the Czech Republic, that he was a very modest man, he was a very quiet man. He genuinely didn't think that anything he was doing was in any way extraordinary. And I think just that very aspect of Sir Barnet Stross's personality perhaps in many ways did lead to the fact that it wasn't so talked about and shouted about, and after his passing there was just nothing said.
Tell us a little bit about the film itself. I have the feeling very strongly from the film that it was a journey for you and that it really almost took you over.
It's such an emotive story. It is such a powerful story that you can't help but become involved in it. You know, meeting people like the children of Lidice, you can't help but be astonished at their outlook on life, given what's happened to them. And actually, having completed the film, I think there's a little bit of sadness amongst us that it feels like our project is coming to an end now, whereas really the rollout of the film is just the beginning of the project, but the making of it has been such a pleasure for us all that we're kind of upset we're not making it anymore and it's finished.
Well, I've seen a lot of films over the years about Lidice, and I think it really is one of the best I've seen. So what else are you going to do to keep the life of the film, as it were, going, and to make sure that as many people as possible do get to see it?
We're going to put it in front of schools. We're having an event coming up soon where we're going to be showing it to 350 school children. Beyond seeing the film itself, we're producing education packs so that this will be taught in the schools, hopefully even going as far as being part of an official syllabus. But, you know, so we are making sure that there is a legacy beyond simply the making of this film, and that education will continue.
And there's a very obvious sense of community in the film, and I thought it's rather nicely reflected in the fact that one of your partners is Stoke City Football Club.
Stoke City are our local football club and play a massive part in the community. You know, more than 1/10 of the population go to each home match, and for them to get on board was really important in raising awareness for the film. But it was their 150th year anniversary last year, the second oldest club in the world, and they've always been a community club. The chairman and the chief executive saw the project, asked us in and offered us both the money to help us finish it, but also, if you like, the marketing weight to get it out there and get people seeing it. And only last Saturday in the programme was a feature about the film and about us coming out here to premiere it, which raising that awareness is just as important as helping the finance the project.
And finally, I expect that people hearing this interview will think, I'd like to see the film. Is there any way that they can get to see the film?
Fingers crossed it'll be on television. If not, we will make the film available online. We want this to be seen by as many people as possible, and obviously television is the easiest route to market for that. If not, we will put it online for people to watch.
Michael MacDonald and Chris Gibbs, thank you both very much indeed for talking to us. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.